Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are talking national politics of the day. The big news of the week is that the infrastructure bill finally passed. To the chagrin of the progressives in Congress, it passed without Build Back Better. It happened possibly. Well, we'll talk about why it happened. It is possibly good news for Joe Biden, possibly good news for the country. But Build Back Better, well, we'll talk about whether or not it will pass or what form it will pass, but it is kind of in limbo right now. It has caused ripples within both parties. Of course, this is the $1 trillion bill, about half of it in new money that goes towards roads, new internet infrastructure, a bunch of different things, and it will supposedly help just about every community in the country. It's money that will be spent that President Joe Biden is going to go around selling this time. He wants to make sure everybody knows this was part of his program, and he wants to take credit for. He hopes it will be a rebound, represent a rebound in his polling and popularity, because his polling has gone down, beginning with Afghanistan and with the economy. But he's hoping this, in conjunction with a good jobs report on Friday and other good news, that this will be a turnaround for him. It is finally showing that he could get something done. A lot of people, a lot of Democrats had been hoping that they could get that thing passed before the Virginia election. Some of the moderates are, blaming progressives for not having passed it. Blaming the Virginia loss on the progressives. Progressives are saying, look, if we had passed Build Back Better with it, they definitely would have been would have gotten it done. And you made Joe Biden look weak by not passing that, and that's the major part of his agenda and much more of a selling point. And so there's big debates in the party. Meanwhile, the Republicans, about 13 of them voted for it. About 10 senators had voted for it, or at least didn't block it. And so I actually believe they actually voted for it. And there is backlash against them. Donald Trump said this was a socialist, bill, and that Republicans voted for it were suckers. There's been calls to pull the Republicans who voted for it off committees, and it's all really messy. And meanwhile, 5 or 6 Democrats who were in the Progressive Caucus voted against it, although it's widely believed that this was kind of a deliberate maneuver to force more Republicans to vote for it, so that it wasn't just a few Republicans hanging on a limb. This is typical Washington politics. But it is finally something that Congress got done of a major significance in many months since the earlier COVID relief plan. Dave, what do you got to say?
Well, thanks for the introduction. I think that it is it's an important achievement for the Democratic Party's perspective, in part because, like you said, they hadn't really accomplished much at all since the very beginning of Biden's term, passing that COVID Relief Act. Secondarily, because the blame and the prognosis about what went wrong in the last, that Virginia race and that New Jersey race, where there was we'll talk about it later, but 14 to 18 point shift at the county level. So people in the Democratic Party were looking to some success. And I think, so that's the glass is half full. Glass is half empty side is the progressives, who effectively caved and sort of lost the power politics game. I think the pressure from the White House must have been immense to just get something going. There probably was some promises. We heard that House members that were Democrats signed a written promise that as long as the CBO budget score plays out in the social spending bill, that they would support that Budget Reconciliation Act. So there's this jockeying for, can we really keep both bills linked, like we said? That's probably still in play, this social spending bill. They were probably looking at the shrinking time window of, look, there's Thanksgiving coming up and the holidays, and the new year will be a full-blown 2022 campaign season. So there was a less and less of a window. And then third and lastly, I think just in terms of like the success of passing the infrastructure bill, it's broadly useful and broadly supported. But that also there's something to be said for just that there's goodwill actors, that the Democrats act in good faith, at least the progressives, and said to themselves, or at least did this mea culpa or moment within the progressive caucus that, look, do they want to deny Americans broadband rural access and so many other improvements in the infrastructure bill at the expense of what, as a matter of principle, or do you take some now and try to get some later? And I think that those three things combined lead us to, it's a relative success, but where America sort of, you could argue, is missing out on just not getting as much. 1 trillion, even 1.2 trillion, depending on how you score it. That's not a significant. 100 billion a year for 10 years is not a massive amount of money compared to the size of our economy, even though trillion is a scary number.
Yeah, that's true, and certainly that's also true of Build Back Better. I mean, it's less than the military budget, for instance, and that's going to be a huge issue with Build Back Better. The media talks about the military budget in terms of annual, but it won't talk about Build Back Better that way, right?
Correct,
And
exactly.
it's just and.
Which, sorry to interrupt you, but that's 770 or so billion a year is the annual military budget.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, why don't they refer to it in its 10-year aggregate amount?
Right.
Maybe more people would be a little bit more nervous about it, especially given that it's probably going to increase every year. So let's talk about, but anyway, we can talk about that another time. But the real question is has Manchin even really promised to pass it if the CBL scores? I'm not entirely clear on that because he's always so vague. It's just, or is he now going to say, well, look at this inflation? I don't know. I mean, he just will not commit to things. Both he and Sinema are just so vague about it. He plays games, and I mean, there's a biblical story about King Solomon's court where the woman the nursemaid had been raising the child for years. The birth mother had disappeared, and then and then they're arguing over who's the real mother. And King Solomon has them in court, and the child is there and says, "All right, well, you're just going to have to play tug of war, and whoever wins is the real mother, right?" And of course, the servant mother says, "No, fine, just give the child to the other mother." And of course, King Solomon says, "You're the real mother," because the real mother is the one that has the best interest of the child. Unfortunately, King Solomon isn't around to give the pot to the progressive, so you got to hope that the voters are King Solomon, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Manchin doesn't care. He doesn't care about the Biden agenda. He doesn't care about the party. Who knows if he's even going to stay in a party if it's not in his best interest? So, the progressives, basically you can say they lost, unless we'll see what happens if the CBO scores it. But now all of a sudden with the 6-point whatever interest, who knows what Manchin's going to do?
So you mentioned Manchin. He actually did. I listened to a clip of him speaking, and he meanders about inflation, maybe not being transitory, maybe getting worse. And he said out loud he doesn't think we need a new entitlement. So they pulled out the paid family leave originally, but then they put back in a 4-week version of it. And so he's saying, look, I don't want this new entitlement at all. And he's basically signaling that that's a red line for him. So, yeah, he's somewhat, sending mixed signals. I don't know if we want to get too into it right now. I know we don't have a ton of time, but you mentioned inflation. So there's this, if we just point to an economist like Paul Krugman, and he says, look, the information is ambiguous. What we're seeing is probably still relative to last year, at least the huge difference, that 6.9% annual rate. It's only a 0.9% for the month. So yeah, so he's saying that we'll get into it more, but the idea is that it's likely because of COVID primarily. If you look at it different ways, you'd rather err on the side of supporting the economy instead of making things worse.
We got to move on, but Biden cited 17 economists who said that BBB would actually help with mitigate inflation. But we got to move on to the next topic, which is related.
We are living in a society where the very, very rich are getting phenomenally richer. Meanwhile, the working class of this country is struggling. You got 600,000 people who are homeless. You got parents who cannot afford childcare.
The game is to shrink the cost, start a whole lot of programs, and claim, look, this is just one more round of the kind of inflationary policies that they enacted earlier this year on a party line basis. They dumped almost $2 trillion on the economy, sent inflation through the roof, and they're not through. They want to keep on doing it with higher taxes and entitlement programs.
So I'm here today to talk about what's fundamentally at stake right now for the families and for our country. For most of the 20th century, we led the world by a significant margin because we invested in our people. We invested in ourselves, not only in our roads and our highways and our bridges, but on our people and our families.
All right, we're going to do the next two topics, state of the Democratic Party and state of the Republican Party, as we're going into next year's midterms. And there's a lot of news about both. Democratic Party, there is a lot of conflict between progressives and moderates. And I really don't think we should even refer to Manchin and Sinema as moderates. They really are conservatives. I mean, their politics and policies are to the right of Republican moderates in a lot of ways. I mean, at least in terms of economics, Manchin is anti-choice. Sinema, I don't even know where she is on social policies these days. We know she's bisexual. I assume that means she's at least moderate, if not liberal, on social issues. But I don't know. She doesn't say much about them these days. So it's just but at any rate, in terms of economics, they are far to the right. I mean, it's just and basically, I don't even know if you could say they're ideological. They're just whatever their corporate people want them to be. And in terms of that, they are there to block any type of reform, block any green reform, and block anything that would make pharmaceuticals affordable for elderly. I mean, just, free market. I mean, it's a free market reform. I've said this before on the show. We want to do away with socialism that protects pharmaceutical profits right now. We want to open it to the free market so that market forces actually affect pharmaceutical prices. They don't want that. So, we've got a problem there, and we've got progressives who, they did back down, but they've shown muscle for the first time. This is actually the first time they've held this long. I think they just finally figured, you know what, we don't want to bring the whole party down. Whether or not Virginia loss was caused by them, and it was caused, as I think, by a very bad candidate, a centrist candidate. That McAuliffe was a bad, centrist, boring candidate. But also, we can say it wasn't critical race theory, but it definitely was culture wars. And since last week, I've looked at some of the books that the parents were exposed to staying home, and some of those books are actually pretty bad. I mean, things about, kids being told that whiteness is bad. You got to really explain that to a kid about whiteness being bad, what whiteness means. That's maybe a real advanced concept to understand that whiteness doesn't mean your white skin. Maybe you just don't teach that to 8-year-olds, and that was a children's book, right? So maybe going to college, if you want to play around with it, fine, but not to an 8-year-old. I mean, some really bad things, and that wasn't even the worst of it. So I do understand why that happened, and then the resistance, and then on top of that, for McAuliffe to say, and by the way, parents, stay, we know what's better. That I'm surprised it was that close after seeing that. So we've got this issue of, and I hate to use the term wokeness. I don't have a better term at this point, but it's like politically correct. The right gets a hold of it and uses it, and then when we start to use it, you're kind of playing into those tropes. But we got to come up with some words to describe it, because it is a problem, and we have to address that. But of course, if you try to push it, you start saying, well, but what about institutional racism? How do we deal with that and not play into the right-wing troops? And we got to find a way to do that. And that's part of what the Democratic Party is going to have to struggle for. But the fact of the matter is, the Democrats lost votes in communities of color as well, because working class people are losing jobs. We've lost manufacturing jobs across the board, with all communities, and we've got this bizarre situation where the price of cars are going through the roof because we have no way to get semiconductors, because there's not one plant in the country, not one way to make them. We are totally dependent. Everybody worries about foreign oil. We can at least make some oil. We have no capacity right now to make semiconductors. They're talking about opening one up in Arizona in a few years, but that is just absolutely insane that we have such a dependency on this item that we have no way of making for years. It's just it is so absolutely insane. We had this craziness where you have this notion of wealth. We used to have it. I'm going to get to you in a minute, but the measure of wealth was these things that we made, and we used to make these things and we'd sell them to other countries, and the value of the wealth stayed in. And I think during the 1990s, the third way Clintonism was, well, we're going to have this high tech, and that's going to be our source of wealth, not these things. Well, the problem is that wealth stays with the upper class, with the Zuckerbergs and the rest, and maybe the middle level people making $100,000-$200,000 a year. It's not trickling down, certainly not in the Bay Area, right? People can't afford to live there. So we got a problem, and the Democrats are struggling. How do we deal with this?
So I'm gonna start from where you stopped, which is Houston. We have a problem. You touched on a whole spectrum of issues that are of concern, and you like starting with, say, Terry McAuliffe's loss as a sort of a not a great candidate, running through, well, what does it mean to be a moderate anymore when it seems like a lot of the moderate establishment candidates and leaders and institutions, legislatures and both federal, state, and local across the country that are Democratic have this sort of beholden nature to their funders and to the whether it's Business Roundtable or various pools of money or just other, like I said, institutions that fund campaigns and fund the political process. So the tour that you took describing some of these problems, one of the things that you mentioned also is, with someone like Sinema, we don't really know what she stands for necessarily. It seems like more sort of self-interest, the funders, the future jobs down the road, certainly not the constituents. There's been a disconnect from the constituents. But say where Manchin sits and where Sinema sits is different than sort of a prognosis about the overall party. And where you kind of touched on at one point was that Bill Clinton's third way, this whole DLC, Democratic Leadership, Council, that their perspective was that there's going to be a triangulation that occurs between the traditional base of constituents that have to support you because they have nobody else but the Democratic Party, everybody to the left, and you can get middle road people, non-participants, people that are typically in the business community, center-right people, maybe even poach some Republicans, which like the that Lincoln Project was Republicans who were against Trump. So that third way sort of rematerialized here in this most recent campaign for president last year, and then also for McAuliffe, and somewhat ironically, but to prove a point, McAuliffe was part of that whole Clinton team, that whole program, that whole DLC, that middle of the road, the moderate establishment. He was a former head of the party. He was a former head of the Democratic National Party. So the party has proven through its actions, its vision includes corporate interest, financial interest, Wall Street. One example of this is, but let's not forget pharmaceutical industry, energy sector, because that's so relevant to today. So one thing that I think, point I want to make here is we see that there's a difference. There's the country. If you look at the map, blue being Democrat, red being Republican, the coasts are blue. Illinois is blue. Arizona and New Mexico. Sorry, Arizona and to the north of it, like Colorado, I guess, are blue. But every place else is red primarily, except for city centers. So there is a disconnect, and some serious soul searching has to reach the kitchen table.
Yeah, we're going to have to discuss that. There are some candidates, Democratic potential candidates, that are trying to recreate that. I mean, Sherrod Brown is one of those candidates who can talk to people. John Tester, I would consider a moderate, but also a populist with left ideas and things like that. We got to talk to those candidates who can win in places like Montana, Ohio, and the rest. Will they start kind of a revolution back in that direction to bring Democrats to be able to talk to working class people? They got to learn how to talk to them. They need to learn how to listen to them. And maybe they need to pull back from some of the culture war stuff. Well, we're going to have to come back to this because we didn't get into any details, but that's generally where the Democrats are. But we're going to move on to the next topic. State of the Republican Party. All right. I would say that the Republicans were on their way, by all the historical forces and by the, chaotic state of the Democratic Party to retake Congress next year. But don't take anything for granted because, man, they've got their own problems. They've got a lot of problems. Looking at the Senate, they've got a couple of problems. They've got one major Senate candidate backed by Trump, who is their kingmaker, who's just been accused of serious assault against his wife, who is now on record as talking about women as tyrants because they don't have men, they don't seek happiness in men, so they get into their own careers, and now we've got generations of tyrants of women. You've got Sununu, who has now said he's not running. That may have blown their chances of New Hampshire. They were pretty sure, all the polls were showing that Hassan would be defeated in New Hampshire. None of the other Republican candidates are polling ahead. They're close, but none of them are polling ahead. That probably is a pretty good possibility of a hold for the Democrats. So, they've got that happening, but also, what do you do about Trump? The message of Virginia is stay away from Trump. Trump kept a discipline. He kept away. He almost kind of messed up at the end there. He actually showed up there, and Youngkin did a really fine dance of, I sort of support Trump, I don't. Kind of the Schrodinger's, candidate there. I'm a Trump supporter in one context, a non-Trump supporter in the other. But man, that takes a really deft, tightrope walk. I don't know that all the candidates can do that, and I don't know that Trump is going to stay that quiet the way he did. Especially if he starts getting angry at people not basically paying homage to him, and especially if he gets annoyed at the fact that that people are saying look forward rather than backward, as some of the Republicans are saying, and not pushing the big lie. And Youngkin was able to stay silent on the big lie, but he wants the big lie pushed, and especially, a lot is going to be riding on what happens with January 6th. Trump just lost in court, basically saying that executive privilege only applies when you're the president. He's scrambling right now to get another stay, hoping that the Supreme Court will rescue him. We'll see what happens, because the records could be in their hands as soon as Friday, and if they do, it just opens up all kinds of stuff, and they do not want to be getting stuff that is going to be out during the campaign. So they've got a problem. The Republicans have a problem. They've got to not only win seats, they got to hold on to the seats they have. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, which is a swing state, has completely invested himself in the big lie. He just went all out Trump. It's fine if you're Hawley or somebody in a completely red state, but Ron Johnson is not in a state that went to Trump. So, it's close, but it's not one you could do. So it's sort of like you can't live with them, you can't live without them, and you're going to lose independence if you go with them. But but if you don't go with them, they're either going to vote against you in the primary or not turn out for you in the general. And if you don't have a really good culture war thing going for you, you got a problem.
So Houston, we have a problem part 2, I guess.
Yes.
Again, thank you. You touched on a ton of important issues, I think, that are worth paint a picture for the party that there's some struggling in the near future. I would say one of the things we saw this week, which is like sort of a, how would you say it? Like it's representative, I guess, of where the Republican Party finds itself right now, is that there was a public backlash against the passage of the infrastructure bill. Yeah. And, as we talked about probably, I don't know, at this point, 6 or 8 months ago, that's one thing that's supposed to be an obvious choice, bringing home the bacon, projects on infrastructure that are necessary and helpful and provide jobs and stimulate local economies. It should be a no-brainer.
And Trump wanted a $2 trillion one.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Which is almost identical, except for a few, things. But yeah.
So I feel like that kind of sheds light on where, I'm not going to be paint the entire party with a brush because it's not fair, but there's a core belief that sort of gets flirted with and that gets support and endorsement that really is about political grandstanding like I say, I think it's team building. They're trying to say, look, we've got a very active and very loud and base that likes Trump. And Trump was able to pass $1 trillion tax cut, and so if we have the numbers and we get the vote out, then we can pass X, Y, and Z, or more importantly, block things. That seems to be blocking these things seems to be their MO these days. And another indicative element of this is that GoSer video that you pointed out.
Yeah.
If you are a statesman, you're not going to publicly have your digital team produce an anime video that projects your face on a creature that goes and kills the opponents. The AOC was killed in this video.
Yes.
Sent out by tweet, and Twitter said we're going to leave it up because it's really important that everybody knows it's out there, and then they changed their mind and then now it's down. But the idea of him and his team and his allies defending this video, I like satire. I like anime. I think that there's a place for that. But killing in this political climate, it's irresponsible at best to condone that kind of violence. And I just think it shows that their core impulse right now is to agitate and motivate the base. I can talk a little bit more about these senatorial candidates, but I'll give you a shot if you want to respond.
Well, I just also it highlights back to Gosar because everybody wants to know who he is. According to one of the insurrectionist people who's maybe talking to the January 6th committee, he's the one who offered the pardons to people ahead of the January 6th. And it not only is that really bizarre because you can only offer pardons if you're having conversations with the president about that, but what for? If this was going to be a peaceful demonstration, what are you offering pardons for ahead of time? Of course, he's going to deny it, but why is this guy even saying it? He's not even in a plea bargain or anything. He's just feeling betrayed. Like, why aren't these Republicans like stepping up and backing these protesters, right? I mean, it's a really interesting thing. And so this video is just bringing attention to him and to this whole thing. So they're really, and again, they're out of touch with it. And if it was in reverse, I mean, it would just be, there would be hell to pay. I mean, look what happened to, what was the comedian, Kathy, when Griffin, when she beheaded Trump as a joke, right? Yeah. I mean, it works, it works different ways. Of course, she's a left winger and she's a woman, she can't get away with it, but with when a right winger does it, oh, come on, it's just a joke, it's just, but anyway, Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to talk about some Senate. So you mentioned Parnell, and according to The Hill, like you said, his ex-wife is in a custody battle and with him, and she testified that there was domestic violence against her and against them, and other things to besmirch his character. That's a hit for them in the state of Pennsylvania. I don't think we need to talk too much more on that, other than to say that the Trump-endorsed candidate has blemishes, which is a step backwards. I think what's really important Senate race to point out is Sununu in New Hampshire. So he's the governor. He served 3 two-year terms, and he was flirting with the idea of running for Senate, so much so that representing New Hampshire in the federal government, so much so that he was attending events just last weekend in Las Vegas. It's the Republican Jewish Coalition Conference, and people really thought his announcement was imminent, and he was making overtures that his announcement was imminent. Rick Scott, the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, didn't know that he was not going to run until Sununu's public announcement. So he's in a very vulnerable seat. Maggie Hassan is a Democrat senator there, and her seat is considered very vulnerable. Her approval rating is down 33%. And so in head-to-head matchup and polling, Sununu was ahead. One Republican operative said the takeaway was that this was handled very poorly. He publicly flirted with it. He hyped it up as the big announcement, and then he bailed based on what he saw in Virginia. And his position is he wants to get things done. If he goes to Washington, he's not going to, Republicans in the Senate, he doesn't feel that they want to accomplish anything. He feels that he can help improve people's lives better in his current role.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe there's something he's not telling us, but who knows? More on this in future episodes as well, as we get closer to the election, but we have to move on to the next topic. Okay, critical race theory. We've discussed that critical race theory is not taught in the high schools, but, it's kind of beside the point because there is a culture war. And as we discussed before, there are some really bad things in the books and some really odd things. I'm saying this as a complete leftist who wants the full history taught to the kids and some things, but there really are some things that really maybe shouldn't be taught, especially to the shown. Some of the materials are questionable. I did see one of the parents on a PBS show showing us some of the books. I'm not talking about Beloved, which is literature and the rest. That's, I'm talking about some really questionable books, and I'm not going to go into detail. But the fact of the matter is it's not just people who don't want their kids learning, they don't want their kids reading Baldwin or the autobiography of Malcolm X. It's not that. I saw one of the parents saying, I'd love for my kids to be reading autobiography of Malcolm X. I wish that's what they were reading, right? So there is a lot of, there's a huge discussion, but we are talking about where we're at with this, and there is a revolution because what happened with the pandemic is all of a sudden these parents are getting these materials and saying, I didn't know my kids were having that this was what they were having to do. And so all of a sudden now they're going and they're showing up to board meetings, and board people are, and they're angry because they're being rebuffed. They're saying, well, this is what experts say that you should be taught. I can understand that. And Democrats had better understand that, and progressives had better understand that, parents need to be part of the discussion. And maybe so there are a lot of parents who are racist and don't want their kids learning certain things, but this is also happening in communities of color who are there, okay? And there's also issues of homophobia and transphobia and the rest, but there needs to be a better discussion, and progressives maybe need to handle this a little better, and maybe need to stop saying, oh, you need to listen, you need to shut up and listen, because, that works well on college campuses where you can kind of play on these kind of guilts with, white kids who are curious coming out, but it's not going to work with parents. I'm sorry, it's just not going to work with parents who are, emotional about their kids. You can say that they should just absolutely, because certain groups are oppressed. And so if people, coming from those groups, but it's not going to happen. So we need to find, we need to find different ways of doing it, because what's going to happen is you're going to lose it all. and we need to talk about it. I think that there is a culture war. We need to figure out how we're going to do this, we're going to lose it all. What I'm seeing in terms of some of these parental reactions is it's not all irrational racist stuff. There is a very real concern about it, and even in San Francisco, the destruction of murals that were painted by socialists, that were actually trying to raise concern. We talked about it actually on my radio show, right?
Yeah.
The renaming of schools, and there's a recall campaign in San Francisco. These are not, redneck places. There is a recall campaign that's probably going to succeed against several board members down there. Because of a white person telling Asians that they were racist against black people, and it got very messy. And because of of a number of other things, and there's a lot of emotion around it, and there really needs to be a better way of talking to people. And I'm going to let you interject at this point.
So I mentioned in an earlier segment that, depending on what counties you're looking at, and there was a shift, a big shift. So in counties that voted for Trump last time, there was a 14% shift in favor of Republican candidates. In counties that voted for Biden, there was an 18-point shift in favor of Republican candidates. So this is we're talking about Virginia, and we're talking about New Jersey. In New Jersey, there was no critical race theory taught in the schools.
Right.
So racism itself is not really the culprit here, even though you can point to the concept or the conversations about race. And I've heard, and I did a show about this last week. There's a lot of experts out there with some amazing insights, but realistically, just talking about this is a challenge because it creates uncomfort. People, as our colleague Aaron also points out, people get sad and people get mad when they're told about they're forced to confront some really complicated ideas. But that said, it's a bigger picture than that. Just for historical context, the backlash to the civil rights movement in the 60s pulled the South away from the Democratic Party, and so the Republican Party was able to focus on crime, welfare, violence, and the working class sort of went along with that narrative. It wasn't simply race, arguably anyway. And Republicans won the presidency 5 out of 6 contests from 68 to 88. Only Watergate, kind of post-Watergate, brought Jimmy Carter into the fold in 76.
Right.
But now we're talking. Now let's fast forward a little bit to the Bill Clinton administration after Reagan and Bush. We talked about how he tried this third way, this DLC triangulation of trying to pull the middle together. One of the key takeaways I think that they did see, that they did capitalize on, was that culture trumps policy in many ways. People don't really sit down and think about policies when they feel something that's bringing sadness and anger to them. So not to oversimplify, but that's sort of what we're risking here, is if there's a policy that, look, we really want to discuss the history of race, we want to teach people, and we want to conceivably advance our conversations about it, we have to understand that there's going to be a retraction, a pullback, a withdrawal, and that language matters. So just one example that's pragmatic, so it's not all hypothetical. It's something that I know you have a strong opinion about. Defund the police. In the wake in Minnesota of the murder, police murder, people, rightfully so, of all races around the country protested that want something different, something new, some degree of accountability, some awareness, some awakening, some progress. But it's now become a culture war issue when you say, wait, defund the police, what about my need for security? And so we saw a congressional district down in Texas that's majority Latino that elected a Republican. It's a strong, solid Democratic bastion of a district, but they elected the Republican candidate in response to this climate. It's just one example of how, Eric Adams, he won the mayoral race in New York City. Jim Clyburn, the House Democratic whip, also African American. These are folks who disagree with the idea of using the language defund the police. I'm all about a public discourse. I'm all about advancing the conversation and improving policies. I think that's a great idea. But we just have to be aware that the GOP is going to run a scorched earth campaign nationwide in every state, every local district around language, and culture war is something that people need to be prepared to process.
Yeah, moving further to the left, one thing I've really noticed, because I come from a family to the left where my grandparents were the old left, the communist left, my parents and my uncle were of the new left. And there was a lot of divide there, and there's a lot of ways I side with the new left. My grandfather told my father one time, ecology is a bourgeois science, blah, 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 and a lot of that. But the communist left, the old left, knew how to talk to the working class. I think the new left lost track of that. They were college students. They were in that they looked down on them. They were, well, you guys are the ones that are hard hats that are beating up on us for, protesting the war, and all of that and the rest. But the old left might have been myopic in a lot of ways, but they did know how to talk to the working class. They were in the working class. They were of the working class. West Virginia was a Democratic Party stronghold up until Dukakis took it. It was one of the few states Dukakis took. It was, coal miners were the only people, the only unions that struck during World War II. They were class conscious up against patriotism at the time. Some of the biggest stories. It's something that the Democrats lost track of is class consciousness. And that's not part of the what do you call it, intersectionality. Class is not part of the intersectionality. It has to be reincorporated into the thinking. More on that another time.
Congress must act. We cannot leave here to go home to our families.
We will not leave this town until we have voted, up or down, until we have voted on direct relief for working people.
Mr. President, you're very aware, because in the committee that we both sit on, we've worked through a process of trying to form an answer to a problem that is coming at us again in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, we will hit the end of the fiscal year, which means the countdown clock will begin again towards when we're headed to another government shutdown.
All right, final topic of this show is the state of the pandemic. It's playing less and less of a role in politics. One of the things that both the Democrats in New Jersey and Virginia tried was what Gavin Newsom did to defeat the pandemic. They just went full bore on all in on their policies. They were attacked for the masks and the vaccine mandates and the mask mandates. And Gavin Newsom just said, damn right, and said, yeah, that's how we're getting out of this, right? Well, it worked back in August and September, for then, because we had the Delta variant and we needed to still get out of it. Come November, people aren't thinking about that as much. They're thinking about other things, including the economy and getting back into schools and things like that. So it wasn't as effective. I don't know that people are thinking about it as much now, especially since we are starting to pull out. Maybe, of course, it's always ambiguous and we never know. Every time we think we're starting to pull out, we end up, either some new variant and coming back in. Dr. Fauci is like, seeing things that are happening in other countries, that there might be some other variants. Maybe they aren't spreading as quickly. Maybe they won't be as dangerous, but maybe they'll be more dangerous. We don't know. It's always a question, but we're opening up. We're opening up to travel now, even though they're supposed to be vaccinated. They could catch it here and bring it back elsewhere and create. It's a real question. Good news is more people are becoming vaccinated. The mandates work. As much as the New York police union screamed about it, and there were protests on the Brooklyn Bridge, and police were saying, we're not going to do it, we're going to quit, and you're not going to have any police, helping on the streets. Only 34 police quit, and apparently most of them were close to retirement anyway. Out
of 30,000, not to jump to, they have 30,000 officers. So
right. So
fractions of a percent.
People don't want to give up their work over this, right? It's just the airlines. I think it was less than 100. It turns out that they do work. You might question their constitutionality or whether your freedom is affected, but it's, whether or not it's the right thing to do. But we've had mandates. Mandates go all the way back. George Washington mandated, for the military. There were mandates, all throughout history. We've mandated all the other vaccinations for schools. We do get some people complaining about it, but not that many, right? And so it's not that big a deal. But they're working. They are slowing the spread, and this mandate that's now been stayed in court. We'll see if the stay remains in court. But businesses have been using it as the cover to implement it anyway. A lot of businesses wanted it. They just didn't want to get their employees upset or anger the unions. So even though it's stayed, a lot of businesses are telling their employees, well, we know that's just going to be set aside. So they're implementing it. It's working. I think that's the whole idea. So where I think the last call we were at about 60% total adult population vaccinated, close to 70%, at least partially. I don't know exactly where we're at. But now we have the children's vaccine, and it's taken off. Biden apparently did really organize it well, 25,000 pediatricians. So far, we've had like 900,000 kids have received the vaccination, possibly over 1 million as of tonight. They anticipate hundreds of thousands of more. People are complaining that they can't even get appointments to do it into December. I mean, so it's going fast. If kids are going back to school and parents are comfortable with sending their kids back to school, it means women return to the workforce. They work. We heard about this 500,000 jobs on Friday. Might be partly due to the fact that people are starting to return. So we're in pretty good shape. It's becoming less and less of an issue. Will it become an issue again? Again, if we keep thinking we're out of this, I don't know. Maybe we'll slip back in, or maybe we're kind of reaching the end where a combination of the vaccinations and the not completely reliable natural immunity can create some kind of herd immunity. I don't know. But the problem is the whole world is not. We got a lot of countries that have no vaccinations yet, and that's a problem.
Yeah, thanks for the segue for me. You read my mind. I like to kind of just go, try to provide a little bit of context. And so one of the things that I think kind of stands out is, like you said, there's this travel ban that was lifted for vaccinated people, and so there'll be more interactions through airports and other countries than there's been before. But not just flights from overseas, but also the northern and southern borders, Canada and Mexico. So there's some degree of normalcy being returned to travel and transit. Well, unfortunately, that also means we have to look outside of our borders and think, well, yeah, maybe we have 60 or 70% people vaccinated that are adults. We're looking for, we're in the home stretch in terms of adults, in theory anyway. And also with children getting the rollout, like you said, a couple million by the end of the week, likely. That's what's anticipated, over a million as of last night or tonight. It's really moving forward in that sense domestically. But again, for context, globally, this week, COVID cases reached a milestone of 250 million people, and there are record outbreaks in Eastern Europe. It's just one element of it. I know from colleagues that vaccination levels in other areas like Pan-Africa, I think it's still under 5%, or at least that's what it was last time I checked. And so the Delta variant really is surging, and right into the sweet spot of when people are going to be doing more travel. But the general trend is down. So a 36% decrease over the last 3 months globally. And that's just one source. Other people can, tinker with the numbers differently, but that's a good path. But still, at our current rate of infection, that's 50 million new infections every 90 days. And so that's without any change in status quo to variants. That's a lot of cases. And in the aggregate, even if we are even if we reach the majority of a vaccination, we're still talking about that's the goal, like the eye on the prize. The goal, the state of the pandemic is we successfully prevented a destruction or a crash of our health system from overwhelming people. It was stressed in areas. Hyper stressed if you talk to the people working in these medical facilities. People, there's even resentment and contempt, I would say, about people not getting vaccinated from some healthcare people that I've spoken with. But the truth is the system held because of the extraordinary measures that were taken. And so where does that leave us? Well, as it looks right now, we can do things like go back to school successfully, go to, you see sporting events on television. People are putting their guard down a little bit more. We're opening up. And even our own public health officer, in conjunction with the public health officer from the county north of ours on the North Coast here in California, they've talked about a plan for when they could actually remove the mask mandate in public spaces. And I forget the exact metrics, but they're talking about if we reach 80% vaccination and the rate of hospitalization and deaths reach a certain low number, then we could actually progress to that place that we all wish we were at, which is where I think when people voted for Biden and people, to a certain extent, at the beginning, getting back to politics, the beginning of this term, there was this hope that we would return to normal. But the economy certainly hasn't yet, in part because the virus hasn't yet. So that it's all linked together. But I do think that, maybe it's half full in my perspective, barring some new variant which could wreak havoc with everything. It seems like coming at around January, February, we could actually be seeing after the winter season where people get cold and flu and stuff, we could be seeing some real changes in terms of what people are most resistant to, which is wearing masks.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do think we're probably going to wind down on this. There really needs to be an international campaign, though, to get to the countries, the lesser known. This has been the inequity of it is not. It's not even just a question of morality. It is injudicious, the inequity of it, because you can't. We have a global economy. We have people traveling around the world. You cannot just. This is not an a national thing that you can contain. We have people traveling all over, even to the poorest countries, because that's the nature of the thing. We have people, traveling on foot. We know we have a lot of immigrants. That legal and not, and so it really is in our interest to do that. I'm hoping. I know the UN is trying to take that on, but my feeling is that. Well, anyway, I do believe we are starting to move out of it, and it's going to be less and less of a political issue. Even the whole vaccination thing mandate is slowly dying as an issue, one way or another, as a culture war issue. Well, Dave, what have you got for us for predictions?
I guess the theme of the day is half full glass. So I'm trying to see things. Look at the data, look at the uncertainty, look at what we know and what we don't know about all things being equal, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's inflation or the economy's healing overall. But I'm going to apply that to the budget reconciliation bill, and from a glass half full perspective, it seems to me that in the House, the team representing the president's administration, the caucus, the Democratic caucus, is going to find a way to stick together. The question for passage, in support of passage, the question is about Manchin and Sinema. And I am hard pressed to think that they would stake the future of the country on a grandstanding stunt for self-promotion in Sinema's case, or for the energy industry in Manchin's case. I think that there is enough money, there's enough positive progress in the bills that we will see that bill get passed. I don't know the timeline on it exactly. I think that they're going to try to move it forward during this calendar year. I doubt that that's going to happen, but I do think that they're going to be able to find a way to pass this monumental legislation.
And 6% inflation over a year sounds scarier than it is. There's actually good news in that, because we haven't had inflation since like 2008, since before the crash. We've actually been in need of inflation because it's been deflated for so long. And so when you take into account the fact that we were coming from a very deflated market, both from the long term of not having much inflation and the deflation caused by the pandemic, from what you started for, 6 is worse than it looks like. It looks worse than it really is, and that's over a period of time. We'll find out what it has been over the more recent soon. So it's just So we need to really look at it in those terms, and I think that will be put to Manchin. He probably is kind of feeling glee. Oh, 6 points. Okay, I'm going to be able to use that. But I don't think he's going to be able to use that as a talking point very much. If it works out for the CBO, that it's going to be less of a budget impact than the bipartisan bill. He's going to be hard pressed to oppose it on that basis. But I still think that he and Sinema are going to strip it of the paid leave, and they're going to send it back to the House without paid leave, and if there is going to be negotiation of drug prices, it's going to be for the ones for the patents that have already expired, but we'll see, and I don't know. I think it could happen before the end of the year, but we'll see. All right. Well, that takes us to the end of the show. Next week, we'll probably come back to the redistricting stuff because we've got a lot of news that's developing. I'm hoping that a couple more maps will be finalized by then. By finalized, I mean before the lawsuits. But until next time, keep thinking.